Thousands of authors have made the jump to self-publishing. Now you can take control of your own destiny and get your book published today with help from self-publishing experts Adam Stempel and Chris Wallace on the Written Well podcast.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Written Well podcast. Last week was amazing. The holiday version with Jane Yolen and Heidi Stempel, Adam's sister and mom. So we had to put off the writing your first draft episode for a week, but now we're back at it on track.
Well worth it though.
Absolutely, it was amazing.
A lot of experience between the two of them, and I love talking books with them, and I take a lot of their advice. Though if they asked me, I would never admit it.
I won't tell them. I won't say a word.
Don't say a word
unless Heidi asks me.
No, there you go. Or my mom does.
You probably tell her too, but otherwise I won't.
It's very reassuring.
So we're going to talk about writing your first draft, and that's a big topic for one podcast. But what I think we're going to primarily focus on is getting it done, rather than all the craft things to make your first draft right and all those different things. Just a lot of focus on getting it done and how to get through that process. You told me for years that you just have to write a crappy first draft, know that it's going to suck, and get it done. Just go write it. And now that I've done that about 10 times, I get it. But it was really hard for me to write things that were bad, and also to wait so long. If you write a bad first draft, you've now finished your story and can't show it to anyone because it's horrible. And then you have to do multiple more revisions, which aren't fun, before you can even show it to anyone. And let's be real, writers mostly write for the applause of the audience. At least many of us do. Without that, getting through a big project is tough. Sometimes I can write something just to get it out of my head, but that's a much shorter process. And then the big process, and also no payoff for I wrote this first draft and now my story is complete. I have a thing I'm proud of. I don't have a thing I'm proud of at all. I have this piece of crap, but I got it done. And it is the way to go. It's absolutely the right way to do things. It's just a hard thing to wrap your head around, that I just have to grind out this thing that might suck and I might not use hardly any of it, and that's okay.
It is hard. I'm different from you because I quite enjoy the revision process. Because for me, writing that first draft, it's just the sheer weight of all those words that's daunting to me. When I'm writing short stories, I can, dive right in, and I write them pretty clean, and, and I revise as I go. And, by the time I'm done with the first draft, it's pretty close to done. I'll get some comments from the writers group, and polish it up, but it's not as bad as a novel first draft. Just that sheer weight of words, can be a really tough slog. But I quite enjoy revising because that weight is gone. And now I get to read my story, and I get to revise my story. I get to fix my story and really turn it into something worthwhile without that daunting task of creating 90 to 100 to 120,000 words out of thin air. They're already there. I got most of the words down. Now I just got to make them the right ones.
I did an exercise for myself a few years ago. I have our mutual friend Grant is a fantastic poker player, and he had to learn to be more comfortable with gambling, with the ups and downs of poker, and so he started forcing himself to take free gambles, doing things like flipping a coin for the dinner bill and things like that, to just become more comfortable with it. And it worked, and I have taken that to heart and sort of started to do that in other ways. And one of those things that I did for myself was write a bunch of stuff that I was going to throw away. It's okay to write things. The words aren't precious. There's more of them there. They're all over, and you can grab more, and it's okay. And so I wrote background things on characters that I was never going to use. I know some authors do that, and I had never done it before. I wrote a story that just I knew wasn't really a thing I wanted to publish, like an episode from my life that I didn't really want to publish or wouldn't do anything with. I just wrote it. And that helped me not be so concerned that I was writing words in my draft that weren't going to be used. That I had this. It wasn't the weight of all the words, because I can churn out 1,000 words, 100,000 words. It was the fear of wasting them and not getting them right, and writing things that weren't going to be used. And that's just a part of writing. It's a big part of writing. You're going to write a lot of words that don't get used, and so I made myself do it, just intentionally.
Yeah, the whole murder your darlings thing. You just can't get too attached to the words. They're not special. The story's special.
Yeah.
And if the words are wrong, no matter, I've cut so much great stuff out of books because it doesn't fit. And usually you can tell when you've written something just to get to this great line. If you've written it to get to that great line, it usually doesn't work. If the great line comes up naturally, through the character's actions. But I've, spent a page maneuvering my characters around just to get to this great line, and then I'm like, oh, that's just terrible, because I've forced the characters into it instead of just letting it come up naturally. But there'll be another book for for that great line or great scene. There's no shortage of them.
In writing the draft, that's a big help, actually. That what you just said is more valuable, I think, than people might realize, because that is the thing people do a lot. I see it in stories that I edit all the time, and I see it in books that where it's gotten through, where I can tell this page of crap that I didn't even want to read paid off with this cool line, but that whole thing doesn't belong here. The story is what matters. And when you write the first draft in a way that you're telling the story, rather than trying to get all the things perfect, you don't waste all that time putting in things, writing your way to a spot. You tell the story as it goes. And then you can go in and find those spots and go, oh, this is a spot for a cool line, and this is a spot where this thing fits that's been in my head forever. You can do those things later. That really is the process that almost everyone has to take.
Yeah, and you can really, in the revision, when you're not worried about moving things along, I find I can get in and write really beautiful descriptions where they're needed, and really dig into action and make sure that it's understandable and that it flows and that it's that it's defining character. It's not just that I'm not watching from the outside as two people run in a street. I'm in the mind of one of them with all the emotion and stuff like that. And you can really dig into that kind of stuff when you have already written the frame of the thing. And that's what I like about revising, is that's when you get to really be an artist instead of just a craftsman. Because a large part of writing is just plain craft, just churning out thousands of words to get them on. The misapprehension people have is that that writing is just art, and you're just thinking up these beautiful words and putting them on paper. And there's a lot more craft to it than that, and there's a lot more just grinding. I mean, it's like poker in that. You watch these tournaments on TV and everybody's all in and they're winning monster pots, and most of poker is folding. If you're playing it well, you're folding a lot.
There was a time there, like from 2004 to 2007, where that wasn't true. But then everybody figured out that you can't just raise them on the river every time, and then you start to have to fold some more again. But it was a good run. At what point do you decide, okay, it's time to sit down and write a draft on this thing? Are there triggers that are like, okay, it's time to do this thing, that I've done whatever research, or I don't do research, or whatever it is?
This is a very interesting question, actually, because I've never really considered that. Some things it's because I've got a contract, or I've put it up on Amazon. I've put a release date up on Amazon, and you just got to get going on it. But when it's just a creative process, I mean, I try to write every day, which also means I'm thinking about writing every day, even when I'm not actually writing. So I'm thinking about the projects that I'm going to be writing. And usually there's a moment when I get that first line in my head, or I can really see the opening scene clearly, or sometimes the ending scene if I've got something to aim for. And that's usually when I'll really start digging in and getting it, because I don't need a lot to start. I'm not an outliner. Also, I'm not afraid, like I've told you many times, to write a chapter or two and throw it away and start again. If it's not working, I'd much rather throw it away in the early goings. I'm very critical of my early goings. Despite, talking about writing a sucky first draft, I like to have a very good, strong opening to carry me through. Even though I know after 100,000 words, I'm going to know these characters much better and will probably rewrite large swaths of the opening. I really like to have a fairly good, clean, edited first chapter, strong opening line, good hook, and the whole thing, because that gives me the impetus to keep going. And if I'm not finding that, I'll throw away what I've written and start over and start over and start over until I get something that takes off. I like to say I'm a good writer because I'm a great quitter. I can quit something real early.
When I started taking a lot of pictures, I'm a hobby photographer. The best photographers are the ones who take 1,000 shots a day and publish one.
Mm-hmm.
That the important stuff is what ends up on the cutting room floor, and that you can fall in love with. I mean, 1,000 is a reasonable number actually for me to like go out on a hike for the day, and I'll come back with 1,000 photos, and I'll go through on an initial call and throw away 850 of them, and then I'll go through again and throw away another 90. And then I'm still left with a bunch of pictures I have to deal with, and most of them aren't good enough to even put up on Facebook if I want people to really think that I'm serious about this thing, and then I'll end up with one or two from that trip that I'll go, okay, these are the ones, and I'll put work into editing them and doing things with them. But a lot of it is just what you dump and not putting stuff out that is bad, and taking lots of shots at it, and that seems to apply to writing pretty well too.
Yeah, it's not quite as bad as photography as far as throwing away stuff, but the lack of fear of deleting your own stuff is a good skill to have.
And you like that strong beginning, not because a strong beginning is important for a book, though it is, but because the strong beginning is important to give you the feel of the book and the impetus to write the book.
Yeah, it gives me that revs me up to get going on the rest of the book when I feel like I've got a solid start and a solid foundation. Because somewhere in the middle, I'm going to start thinking this entire book sucks. Like most writers, somewhere in the middle, in the doldrums, there's going to come a time when the entire book sucks. And inevitably, I will probably go back and read the beginning because I'll be like, oh, maybe I'll just do a little editing, see if that gets me back in the mood. Now, if that beginning sucks, when I go back to look at it, that's not going to put me in the mood to finish the book. So it's good to have a good, strong opening there to go back and go, oh, yeah, okay, I remember why I started writing this. This is worth finishing.
All right. And that getting through the middle is the tough part, for sure.
Yeah, there's no author I've ever met who's like, you know what I love? The middle of a novel. That shit is awesome to write. It's the worst.
When you get about 85% done, there's this like race to the finish that's great.
Oh, when you can see the barn after a long ride, mm-hmm. you just break. Sometimes you just break for the barn. My mother actually told me that early on. She's like, all the good writers are finishers. Because we got about 3/4 through a book we were writing together, and she just started sending me a chapter every day. And we were doing alternating chapters with the characters. So all of a sudden, I'm like 6 chapters behind. And she's like, sorry, I can see the end from here. So you go get it. And that's a great feeling. The end of that first draft is amazing when you can see the barn and you're just charging for it. The words are just flowing. You know what's going to happen, but you still got little surprises in you. It's fantastic. But the middle is brutal.
So far with the full-length fiction that I've written, all 3 of the first drafts I've finished for novels, the ending has been a surprise for me. So that's just I'm always looking forward to that now. And I got to the end of one of the things and went, oh my God. Like was shocked that the thing that just happened. And then I had to rewrite a bunch of stuff right before that. But I got there and realized what happened when my character basically told me. And I went, oh, I can't believe this is perfect. And then I had to go rewrite a bunch of stuff. But that really makes it fun. And that's the other end of it. You get the push from the good beginning. But then if you feel like the end is pulling you too, then you get through the middle a lot easier, you know? So,
Yeah.
I've got one project I'm working on now where I know what the ending is and it's cool. And I just have to, and now I'm excited to get there.
Yep. I have had several books, at least 3 off the top of my head, where I had the ending scene in mind. And this is often how I start a book, is that I have the ending scene in mind. But in 3 of these books, the ending scene came before the ending. In one, it got there because it was only like 35,000 words in. It was maybe, I think it was about 40,000 words, the midpoint of the book, which was fun because it made for an awesome midpoint climax in the book because I'd been aiming for this big ending. But then I'm like, I've got another half of a book to write, which was seriously fun because now I'd set up all this stuff that I was going to maybe take care of in a second book. And now I could take care of it in this book. So it was just, it was crazy. I had another one which ended just a couple chapters before the end. And that I just got there and I was like, oh, this isn't the end. I've got this and this to resolve. And then, yeah, so that's, you got to be willing to do that too. When you get to the end you envisioned, even if it's the one you envisioned, if it's not in the right spot or there's more stuff came up, just keep writing along it. But I've had a couple things, not full surprises, but I came up with some changes fairly deep into the writing process. In Company Men, I came up with some things that made the ending much bigger. Like just as my characters were kind of driving up to the big confrontation, I was like, oh, wait a minute, this could happen too. This is going to make it much better.
You
case,
found extra ways to torture your
yes,
characters, I imagine.
It was much bloodier. People died. It was no one liked it. It's selling pretty good though.
Yeah.
Well, that's
when you do any kind of outlining or have any kind of feel in your head for how the story goes, do you think about that or plan the story around that at all when you're writing your first draft? Or is that a thing you figure out and then you go, okay, and start writing and just don't? Do you not worry about that so much once you start writing?
I don't worry about it. It's kind of like going on tour with the band, make a lot of plans, set up all the spots. And then once I get on tour, it just playing shows, just going from town to town, playing show. I'm not worrying about planning stuff anymore. And if a side road comes up, I'll take it. It's an imperfect analogy, but again, it's a combination of being confident that I'll finish the book that I want to every time. I've written 14, 15, I've sold 14, had another one come, I think 15 novels now. That's not a lot by some people's standards, but that's a lot of freaking words. And that's a bunch of books to finish. And I'm confident now that I will finish whatever I start, no matter what weird twists the plot throws at me. So that combination also with the willingness to throw away a few pages if they don't work allows me to write pretty freely, whether it's been outlined or not. And some of my outlines are, what I would call an outline, which is mostly in my head, kind of how I think the thing's going to go, is fairly basic. So I need to add some complexity while I'm writing it. And sometimes that complexity will change the entire idea of the book. But it's inevitably better. Like when I talked about Gallic, where I wanted to write a very small stakes book. And then during the writing itself, things started to fall together, and this conspiracy started to take shape that was much bigger than I had originally envisioned. So it was fun to discover that along with the characters, who also thought they were in a small stakes adventure.
One of the thriller writers, I think in one of the master classes, says every book is high stakes. It just depends on to who. And,
right.
And as you know, there are things in the thriller category and things in the horror category that where no one dies and no one could die, and it's just really a thing that the character would hate to have happen. The stakes have to be high, or nobody wants to read your book. It's just to who, and I can see how that book could have been a perfectly fine book with the stakes only very small localized things, because the characters are very interesting. But if the characters go and get involved in a huge conspiracy, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
they
it's
did
not my
it.
fault. It
there
just
they
happened.
are.
It's it's like I said, if you're going to write in a series, in an open-ended series, some of these books with 17, 24, 30 books in them, you're going to want to get comfortable writing small stakes, which, like you say, are still big stakes to the character. But it's more difficult to do, because if the world is ending, then everything is obviously, the tensions are high. If a person's relationship is ending, well, it's very high for them, but not for a lot of other people. But you need to be able to write those kind of conflicts and dramas as well, because eventually it becomes hard to raise the stakes any higher. And usually I see people, and I've done it myself. You start out with that first book, bam, out of the gate, the whole universe is going to end. If only my heroes could stop it. And now they've stopped it. So what are you going to do in the second book to raise the stakes? And the realization that you can have high stakes, emotional high stakes, instead of physical high stakes, is an important evolution for the author.
We've mentioned thrillers a bunch, just kind of because you just wrote one, and we just wrote the guide to thrillers for the Written Well website. And thrillers are a good example of this concept, where if you're a traditionally published author who writes one-offs, they don't write series nearly so much in thrillers. Sometimes they'll use the same characters over and over, maybe the same main character, but you're not writing a series necessarily. Then you can start off your book with a face appeared and said the world is going to blow up and I have a nuclear weapon and it's also going to release the zombie virus. If you don't catch me, here's how to do it. And you can start a thriller that way. If it's a one-off, you can't start a 12-book series that way. It's tough. You're gonna, unless you're gonna chase that villain for 12 books and not resolve until the end of the 12 books. It's tough. So when you're writing a series, and you want it to be a long series, it's not bad if you start off small. If you look at the ultimate ridiculously long series, the Wheel of Time books, starts off with the kid on a farm, and it's just kind of small stakes to the world. It's just his thing, and then it grows and grows and grows until it's just these world-changing things that by halfway through the series. But it starts off pretty small so that it doesn't get completely out of hand right away, and then have to be make readers tired of you saving the world every 5 minutes.
There are some authors who do that very well. Jonathan Mayberry, who spoke at the 20 Books conference.
And he writes the military...
Joe Ledger.
Yeah, the Joe Ledger books.
He calls himself, he's traditionally published, but very independent friendly. And he speaks at all the independent books. He's a great... He's a traditional author who's very supportive of independent authors. Great guy, very interesting speaker and writer. And he does a great job in the Joe Ledger series of always having world-ending problems in every book.
Your other option there is to do things the way he does, which is episodic. Using the same people. It's not really like a trilogy kind of thing. But with every episode, it's the X-Files was like the just did this perfectly. They were like
it,
the ultimate, where like every episode was an important thing, but then it could be resolved, and then a new episode could be a very important thing again, and that's another way to do it.
well,
To put out lots
thrillers
of
and
books.
mysteries and suspense, private investigation, police procedurals, those kind of episodic thrillers do very well in that. But you still have to. Mayberry set up his characters to specifically be in the position of fighting these world-ending scenarios.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, you run into the characters who, by book 20, you start to wonder, why is this librarian finding a dead body every episode?
Yeah.
The burglar series with Lawrence Block, who
if they're
every
good,
time
if they're good enough
house,
books,
there's a body.
You're just glad she
You don't
found
care.
another one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to write this down because I think it's very important, and so it's a non sequitur to get to it. What we have to figure out here, and I'm going to just give you this, and then I want you to tell me the answer, and then I'll know it. Is
it's a plan.
We've talked a lot about a crappy first draft, just grinding through it and getting it done, and not worrying about keeping all the things or solving all the problems or whatever. So what are we worried about? What is important in a first draft? Why are we doing this thing? If it's just going to suck. So what do we actually want to accomplish with our first draft? Because our only accomplishment is not just writing 90,000 words and then writing the end. That we want something out of this first draft. What is it?
First of all, not everybody does a sucky first draft. Some people edit as they go.
You never told me that. You
What's
lied
that?
to me. You lied to me. You told me that everyone writes crappy first drafts.
It's not true. I mean, once again, there are as many ways to write as there's a liar.
Okay.
Yes. I write fiction, Chris. How is this news? But so not everyone does it. I think the majority of people have learned that it's easier to revise than it is to write perfectly the first time. So in general, the idea is to get the story down and then revise it. So what I'm trying to do in that first draft is twofold. In that I'm figuring out the plot and I'm exploring the characters. And so by the end, and sometimes if I've gotten to a spot where I know a character really well, I will go back and rewrite some of their earlier scenes because I know them a little better now. I won't wait for the revision. I'll go back because it's fresh in my mind. I'll go fix that. So I'm exploring them. When I do plan something, and if you have the idea for the story in mind, I always say I plan for plot, write for character, and revise for theme. Now, this is a massively oversimplified process, but in general, when I come up with a story, when I'm thinking of a story, it's largely plot based. I have some characters, but they're not as fully fleshed as what I think is going to happen. So then I go write it down and I'm exploring the characters. And once I know the characters, they start to drive the plot in possibly different directions because now they're fully fledged characters. I know their background. I know their tendencies. And so when they run into the problems that I have set them, that I know are coming, they might handle them in a different way than I had planned before they had become fully fledged characters. So that's kind of what I'm working out in the first draft. And while I'm doing that, I don't want to worry about too much description or travel log getting from one to some place. Sometimes I'll be like, and then they go here and I move on. And I know that's going to be a page and a half or something of traveling and conversation and stuff,
So a lot of it is just discovery. It is learning about your characters, learning about your story, finding out what happens. It's a process of figuring out what the story is. And the only way to do that is sometimes to write it, which I think part of my problem was that I love to figure out what a story is and can't wait to write 100,000 words to figure it out. So I would go outline the whole thing. and then it's boring to write it.
Then the impetus is gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way I would imagine people who do very strict outlining, they do less revising, because since they've got the discovery process out of the way, then they can spend the time beautifying their language, or in the case of a thriller, stripping it down to the bare bones or whatever's, genre appropriate and their particular voice. But they can concentrate on that more, and they don't have to skip as many sections or descriptions as I and many others do in that first draft, because you've already got the discovery portion out of the way.
If I write a
But a
first
lot of
draft
people, that's
that
what they enjoy.
that has a lot of that skip a scene stuff in it, is it like, I mean, that's the thing I did at one point. I have a book where I wrote about 20,000 words, and it's done. And many of those words are they go to dinner and have a fight. And there's like that's a chapter, and that's what the chapter is. And if I decide I'm going to write this book, I go back and do that. Have I written a first draft at that point? And is that like a thing that people do that they think is an effective way to write?
For me, there is a power in declaring the first draft done. Now, I've never written a 20,000 word draft of a full novel. That seems more like an extended outline to me. But there's certainly people who skip even more stuff than I do.
Yeah. Part of the basis for this question was to kind of point out that your first draft can be whatever the fuck you want it to be. And
yeah.
And that there's not this not this set in stone process where you do X amount of outlining and research, and then you write a first draft that is between 80 and 120,000 words, and then you do X amount of revision. That this doesn't have to be your process, whatever your process is. And if your process is to outline, super outline, mega outline, fill in some of the outline and have a 20,000 word draft, like I did with this story, and then go and fill in the pieces. And then if it works for you and you end up with a book, then that's a fine thing to do. And if you're writing a Jack Reacher book and you're just going to sit down and grind through the whole thing with no plan in mind and end up in the right spot, that's fine too. There are certainly people who do that. We're going to talk a lot about, we're going to mention this probably in most of our podcast episodes. It's about finding what works for you. And so back to what's important in a first draft, discovery is one of those things. And that is discovering characters, discovering story, all those things. But you're also, you talked about your final edit being for theme, but you're also getting a feel for how the book feels, the language of the book. You may start with one thing and then discover your narrator doesn't talk like that, or that the way you're describing this isn't going to be this way. And you can discover all kinds of things, including themes and settings and new characters. You're going to find all kinds of things about your book on the way through the draft, right?
I have in the last 3 books I've written, I've had a walk-on character in the first few chapters who became a very important character. And in one of them, even becoming a point of view character. And they were completely unplanned. And one was just a phone call to someone at a different department they needed a little bit of information from. And then I really liked how this character acted, what their dialogue was like. And I was like, I wonder if I could work them in more. Became a very important person. I had another one where it was a walk-on where I needed the character to do something before this battle happened. It needed to be a little breath. So I'm like, oh, they'll interact with this character. Boom, became a huge part. So I love it when that happens. And what's also great is I had a character walk on in another book that they were really interesting, and I didn't know where they fit. And then I realized they were screwing up the buddy dynamic of my 2 main characters, so I killed them. Because it's another way of dealing with these characters. You don't always have to have them throw you. Sometimes they just need to be disposed of.
But for you to just kill one of your characters is actually pretty gentle, really.
That's right. Yeah, he went quick. He was a sentence, and he was dead. Not uncommon. But yeah, the theme bit is always. I always say, I mean, I know what the plot of my books are, but until I've written them, I don't really know what the theme is. Even if a book doesn't necessarily need a theme, but often there's one, even if you weren't planning on one. My very first book turned out to be about addiction, and that was not my plan.
It was clear from like 4 pages in.
Yeah,
that was what it was about.
Well, and also I went back and punched up the parts that accentuated the theme, and really, really talked about that a bit more.
Is there anything else we that is important in that we want out of a first draft beyond learning about the book? I mean, when we're laying things down, is there a way that we can lay more things down that we'll want to keep or that will be valuable to us later? Do you have thoughts about when you're writing a draft? Are you just immersed in the story and the discovery process? Or are you also thinking about ways you can keep some of this stuff or ways you can lay things down that are useful to you?
Well, I try to write every sentence perfectly the first time. I mean, I honestly do. It's just that in a first draft, if I don't nail that sentence, I'll move on. I'll take a couple shots at it. And if it's just not flowing, I'll move on. So, I mean, there are great big portions of my novels that don't need revision. And I imagine that will be the same with everybody, because we're in general not shitty writers. It may be a shitty draft, but there will still be large portions of it that will be just fine or even excellent. Because I mean, you're trying to write well at every moment. Not you. No. I've got someone in my writers group who is like, "We'll write a first draft," and the final book doesn't resemble the first draft at all. There might be a different point of view character. They're doing wild exploration.
I am definitely writing most of the book I'm going to be keeping in terms of what happens, the characters, the things, all the, but the sentences are just unacceptable. It's not because I'm in a hurry to get this down, to get it out of my head onto the book before I forget it. Because whatever I just wrote reminded me to write something else. And I'm just like in a flurry. And so when I'm actually writing, if I'm working on a novel and I'm writing a draft, I'm between 1,000 and 2,000 words an hour, easy. I type fast, I move fast, because otherwise I'm going to forget things and I'm going to be mad about it. And there are things that go next that I just occurred to me, and they have to get in there, and I better hurry up because that's 400 words from now, and I'm not going to remember it that long, But then the sentences are not where I want them to be. So
what I usually find when I'm really moving is I will find 3/4 sentences where because I thought the whole sentence, and then I had already moved on, and my fingers, we better catch up. And so they'll skip the last couple words of the sentence. But like I said, I mean, I type fast, but I don't write particularly fast. When I'm moving, I'm doing 2,000 to 4,000 words a day.
It's a revision that slows me down. Right? I become very obsessive about the sentences. Then fixing these sentences, they all have to be right. And if they're not right, I have a whole bunch of books next to me that I think are really well written or handle specific themes very well, and I'll compare my book to this book, and I'll just pick up like Water for Elephants is sitting right here because I picked it up the other day to look up something in it, and I'll look up how they dealt with it, and if my sentences aren't as good as those, then it's not good enough, and I need to go fix it. And so
it's a reference mix.
Yeah, they must be as good as this, and why am I writing books if they're not going to be really good? I could go work at the post office if I'm going to do just half-ass work.
That's a great way to do it, because I mean, I saw this in my oldest kid, Ari. They just naturally, as soon as they started writing, I mean, it was kids writing. They were a kid and they were writing, but you could already tell they kind of understood the rhythm of words and the rhythm of writing. And it is a very difficult thing to teach. And I think looking through books that you respect and love and looking at their sentence structure and comparing it to yours is a great way to do it. But there's a certain natural acumen to it that is that makes it much easier to write. Frankly, I was in my very first writers group, and there was a woman who wanted to be a poet, and it was just very difficult trying to get her to understand that there is rhythm and there is meter even in free verse, and that the way the words flow is important. And poetry isn't just writing down your ideas. It's also, making the words and the sentences flow, and it's a tough thing to describe. It's a tough thing to edit. It's more of a, I know when it's not working, but how to fix it it can be very hard. But that's why the revision is nice. You're not rushed anymore. You can sit down and you can sit with it for a while. Also, I like revisions because I can skip around. And again, I outline it in my book on revision, in the How to Write a Fantasy Novel. Volume 3 is on revision. And I talk about the different passes I do. And, and I'll start with an overall pass where I'm fixing easy stuff and making notes of the harder stuff, but I'm not tackling the harder stuff yet, unless it hits me right as I get it. So I'm still giving myself permission to skip around. It's because just trying to, right after you've written the book, to then go back and do a complete line edit, line by line, all the way through is going to make you insane. So I've got different notes, and I
appreciate you saying that. I'm going to not do that now.
That's probably why you hate revision.
That was the plan on one of my books.
You haven't read the third book. Read the third volume. I honestly think it's one of the most important things I've written. I just don't think there's that much out there about revision. I'd love to be wrong. Anyone who wants to post on this, give me more of those books on revisions. I will absolutely go and read them. I love the process. It was fun to think about my own process and codify it, and I'd love to see other people's processes. But it's the thing I remember reading about the least when I was, just starting out and reading 20 to 30 to 40 how to write books. So, and I think it's in some ways, revision is the most important thing. But you can't revise an empty page, which is why you got to get through that first draft. You can't edit a blank page.
And that is why I like to keep so many blank pages. I don't have to revise them.
I don't have to revise this. And the other thing I didn't mention before was the reminder when we're talking about all these different ways of getting through the first draft is, again, we can't teach you to write. You have to learn how you write.
We just keep putting ideas out there more and more and more, and offering options and things you can do. And this pile of books on my desk. In writing one of my books, I thought about what is it that is important in this book. Before I started the draft, it was an idea that wouldn't get out of my head, and I'd been thinking about it a long time, and doing research for it was super fun. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to do it right. I really like this idea. So, what things are important in a book like this? And I wrote down all those things. And that is, I think it's an important thing as a writer to go ahead and write down what you're thinking about and make lists of stuff and do whatever it is you need to do, but do that. Stop sitting and thinking and start doing things with, writing words down. And so I wrote down all the things that are important in a book like this. And then under each of those things, I wrote down which books I thought handled that piece really well, which authors did this. And then I went and ordered all those books on Amazon to make sure that I had 10 of them, and I went and ordered 15 more. A used book on Amazon, a used novel. You can sometimes you get them for $3 with free shipping. They don't cost you anything. So just get them. And then I use them as reference as I go through the book. And I can, like Silence of the Lambs is one of them. In fact, all of the Thomas Harris books, the last couple aren't maybe as great, but all the Thomas Harris books in general handle specific subjects really well. They do amazing, lifelike, terrifying villains. they do a protagonist that's trying really hard and is smart, but is not equipped for this job. That's his thing, that this person grows within the book to figure out how to do the job they must do. And then he handles sophistication and cool factor really well. And so those things I had written down, and I have all those books, for that thing. And so when I'm going through the book, I'm thinking about those things. How does the way that my main character treats his motorcycle is the same way that Thomas Harris would have written, I like to think anyway, about how his character would treat this thing that he loves. And so you're right. And his part of his gift is that when he's in a character's viewpoint, when that character sees things, the descriptions are as that character would see them.
Oh, that's so important.
A really advanced concept that even a lot of pretty well-known novelists don't do, and he just crushes it. If Hannibal Lecter's looking at flowers, he'll describe how ornate they are, but not how warm they are, not how beautiful they are, because he's a sociopath, and he everything will be described as a sociopath sees it. He does a really good job of that with all of his characters.
I think it was Emma Bull who said that description is an opportunity to illuminate character. And I've added to that, in that every word you put down is an opportunity to illuminate character. And I just wrote an article for the site about action scenes, and talking about, a lot of people think action scenes are boring. And that's because if the action scene is boring, it was poorly written. And generally it's because people try and write an action scene that's just describing all the action. And no, you have to describe how the character is experiencing the action.
And why they do the things they do.
Why and what, everything they do in that should reveal something about their character. And it's the same with description, dialogue. Inner monologue, of course, is the easiest way to show character, but everything should illuminate the characters, and that's what makes readers care. That's what makes the book interesting, is being inside the heads of these interesting characters. And I talk about that also in the beginning. I mean, you can start with I used a piece of one of my books where I could have started with this one line, which is a great line, and it's really the zinger hook of the beginning. But instead, it's an epic fantasy. So I start big, kind of looking down at the city. I actually start with a description that's more third person omniscient, and then comes focusing in on our main character. And then we go into their head, and they're in the middle of this action scene. And then I get the zinger of a line, and then have all this action. But the fact of trying to, before I get to the zinger of a line, I'm trying to give the setting, because it's fantasy. You can start with setting in secondary world fantasy, because that's part of why readers are reading epic fantasy, is for that new setting. And then get into the character. The zinger of their inner monologue line makes you like the character, and now you see that they're being chased. So instead of just starting with the chase, which, if you don't know any of the characters, who's chasing who, it's hard to care. Now you care a little bit about the character, and it's even better because if you know anything about my writing, you don't know whether this is a point of view character or just someone who I'm going to kill in the first chapter as an introduction to the world. So there's some real danger for this character.
Even if it's a main character, there's some real danger for the character.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But they'll probably.
But you keep people on their toes by killing both the characters they love and random other characters that aren't important. So you never know who's going to get it next.
I like to have, like we talk about stakes. I like to have stakes for the reader as well. I want them to believe that the characters might not win, because in my books they might not win. They usually do. I mean, I'm not against a happy ending, but they're going to pay a cost. And sometimes in my book, sometimes it might be their life. Sometimes it might be their soul. It might be their personality. If it's fantasy, there's all kinds of stuff I can take from them and still have them win, or they might fail entirely. and you don't have to do that in more than a book or two to create the that specter over everything you write. Some people hated the ending of my first novel, Singer of Souls, and I get it. Some people loved it. But one thing it definitely did was let people know that the main character is in honest danger. This might not end with the main character riding off into the sunset with their love interest at their hip. You cannot count on that. Because I like to have stakes. I like to not know what's happening as a reader. I like to not know whether someone is gonna make it or not.
And because we're a self-publishing podcast rather than just a writing podcast, there's a couple of notes from the self-publishing world on this whole thing. First of all, in self-publishing, your audience, typically self-published authors who do really well, are doing the same thing over and over again but different, and they are often writing things where it's very clear. We mentioned the Jack Reacher books earlier. I know when I'm starting a Jack Reacher book, Jack Reacher's going to win. I know this, and I'm still concerned about it because he does a great job of making it look like, well, Reacher's in trouble this time.
This time for sure.
Yeah, and while Adam makes the stakes real in his books because he is willing to kill off a main character if it's the right thing for the story, most self-published authors don't do that. They write to a formula, and the ones who are making a lot of money often write to a formula that is pretty clear and specific, that it's what your readers want. And we talked about writing in series earlier, and this is another self-published thing. Self-published authors write in series. It's not every one of them, but boy, it's a lot. It's the vast majority of successful self-published authors write in series. And that is because
you can't go killing off your main character.
Yeah, it doesn't go well. Yeah. Although you can spin off characters, you can keep spinning them off. I mean, that's Thomas Harris does that. He wrote a bunch of books in the same world with this this character's story goes off here because this other one died, and you go to the next guy and you go to the next guy, and that does work. But it's important to note that as much as we talk about some kind of cerebral, interesting things that you can do, if you want to be a successful self-published author, the first thing you have to do is give readers what they want. And then once you can do that, then you can be creative about it and do other unique things. But the thing that readers want has to be in there. If you think you're going to write a romance without a happily ever after, you're just going to be poor. Good for you for doing that cool, unique thing that you thought of, but you're going to be poor because people aren't going to read your stuff. They're just not. So you have to have the happily ever after. You have to have the secondary love interest. You have to have this specific formula that works for all romance books. And if you don't have those things, you're screwed. And then once you have those things, you can do, all kinds of creative stuff within that framework. Now, if you're writing to be experimental and creative and do other weird things, good for you. I don't have any problem with that. In fact, I think it's fascinating and I want to read your stuff. Just be aware you're not going to make any money doing it. It is very hard to break the mold and make money breaking the mold. It is very tough to do.
I just wrote a article for the site on genres, and several times in it, I mentioned that I'm very much at times a do as I say, not as I do kind of guy.
Yeah. Well, just like in the music world, you can't just go randomly playing notes everywhere and go off on your own until you know what you're doing. You break a lot of musical rules when you play, but that's because you knew them all first. You have to be really good to go far out on a limb.
That's one of the things I said about genres being both limiting and freeing. And in the beginning, they're limiting. You have to stay within the boundaries, and you have to use all the tropes and stuff. But as you write in a genre long enough, and you internalize those tropes, you can begin to be experimental with that kind of stuff, especially if you've built an audience, because they know that you're not doing it accidentally. And they know that you're going to bring it back home to the comfortable spot if you go off on a little tangent, or if you're mixing genres, though they can be unforgiving as well. But there's a freedom in knowing a genre so deeply that you see that there's actually limitless depth within that genre that you can experiment with. But yeah, no, I mean, giving the people what they want is the way to make a living at it. That is definitely the thing to do. And it's not like I completely ignore that. I just I get bored sometimes. I go a little crazy.
And somebody's got to lose an arm.
But also stepping outside yourself can be good emotionally and professionally. One of the most outlier short stories I wrote got me both my biggest paycheck for a short story and my most prestigious sale as far as the science fiction fantasy world is concerned. So, I mean, and it was very much a departure from what I usually write. So experimenting is not necessarily in and of itself a bad thing, but it's also much more touch and go. And I think we'll do a whole podcast on Rebecca Sims' work with we should see if we can get her on with author prototypes because it's amazing, and talking about, you know, writing to market and who can and can't do it. And
well, it was very valuable when you came back from that presentation and told me about the types and which one I was and that the other ones existed, because I just hadn't really thought about it, but certainly I thought that there were the people like me who could write to market and do the right thing, and then people who couldn't, who were stupid. And as it turns out, that's not all the author prototypes. There are a bunch more. And it was very valuable for me to learn that.
And the fact that she took the prototypes all from successful authors. These were not like, these are the authors who made money and these were the types that don't. She's like, these are 4 author types and all of them make a living. You know, so they're all viable. Some are harder to make a living at. Some have much less of a chance of making a living, but all have been proven profitable in the business world. And it's interesting. I love talking about craft, but business decisions do go into what I choose to write next as well. It's not like I just sit down at my computer and I'm like, oh, I wonder what I'll write today. You know, I mean, I did that once. That's how I came up with 3 penis-themed haiku. You know, that's not really useful.
Your book of penis-themed haiku that came out of that did not sell well. I don't know why. I thought it was great.
I am, however, a published haikuist. I have sold a haiku. But the point being is, even I am not so foolish as to completely ignore the business side of things. But this is why I really enjoyed talking to you and you know, trying to apply some of that focused business acumen into my own writing. You know, and I get better at it every day. I've showed you my chart of trending upwards with every release. You know, and it's partly because I'm just getting my name out there more, but it's also a lot about just being better at the business side of things. You know, recognizing the importance of it and paying some heed.
I think a lot of people go into writing, especially if they're going to write novels, with this very purist idea that I have a thing and I'm going to do my thing and people are going to love it. And that's how it works. It's going to work. And then that's not how it works. And I think about, like, when I started playing music, I thought, oh, I'm going to get together with some people. We're going to write some songs. We're going to play in a band and people are going to love our songs. And it's going to be great. And we weren't good enough for that. Turned out nobody wanted to hear our fucking songs. And so then we learned, we were a blues band, and we learned a bunch of blues songs, and then people liked us. Then we got gigs.
Then we learned the thrill is gone, and all of a sudden we were awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I can still play that song every night.
People love The Thrill Is Gone because it's a great song.
Yes. Now it just makes all the songs in B minor are great now.
Yeah. Well, it's also that you, like I said in the genre thing, you can write to market and write very specifically in a certain very narrow genre, and there is yet limitless depth to what you can do within that very narrow frame.
I got to be very creative in my solos on Thrillers Gone, and then I got to play enough gigs and be paid to play enough gigs that I could learn and get good enough to start writing my own songs. And it progresses from there. You don't just pick up a pen and start randomly writing brilliant things. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are. You got to learn some things, and one of those things is, if you want to do this for a living, you give the audience what they want. Your audience is what's important there. And there are people who just slave away and do their own thing, and people happen to like it because it's brilliant. But there aren't very many Hemingways and Cormac McCarthy's and the guy who wrote Clockwork Orange. Those guys, there aren't very many people who could just do something completely different and are so obsessive about it that they make it brilliant anyway, and some people love it. There are very few of those people, very few, and they work really hard, and most of them don't ever make any money.
And it's okay to be that person too, if that's what you want. You got to know why you're writing. What are you writing for? I mean, that's the first question I ask everyone who wants to be a writer. I say, why? Why do you want it? Do you want money? Do you want acclaim? Do you want to create stories? What is it? And there's no wrong answer, but it will definitely, if you don't know that, you will flounder around.
How often do you think when you ask people that question, they know the real answer?
0%. But I can usually lead them to it with a very small discussion because they've never asked it.
Yeah, our pal Dr. Schoonmaker in the poker world, PhD, who works with poker players, and we did some seminars with him, and he's been a friend for a long time. Al was the person who helped me with that, where he said, "Why do you play poker?" And I said, "For the money." And he said, "No, you could make a lot more money doing something else. Why do you play poker?" And I was like, "Oh,
yeah,
oh, that's tough. Then now I've got to really think about what matters, because he's right. I could be a realtor and make more money than I do doing this." And if and the same thing is sort of true with writing. You're gonna make more money doing something else. If you're writing, it's because you love writing, and so why? So answer that question for yourself, but be real about what you want out of it. That's how I've learned that. What I want out of it is to make a living doing this thing that I love, and then I want a lot of people to tell me they like it. Those are the two important things for me, and the first one is by far the most important, because I can, if I make a bunch of money, I can pay 10 people to tell me they like it, and it's fine. It doesn't matter.
Just get your own hype man.
Yeah, that's right. Flavor Flav lives in Vegas. We go to the same car dealership. I'll hire Flav. But be real about what it is that you want out of this thing. Do you is it just a creative outlet? Fine, self-publish it just in case somebody else likes it. But being real about it is super important.
And because no matter what your answer is, it all counts. I will scour the social networks and look for people telling authors that the particular writing they're doing doesn't count, and I will excoriate them, and I will raise up the person who is writing fanfic or is just writing their journal or whatever they're doing. It all counts. It's all writing. You're a writer if you write. Figure out why you want to do it, and then do that, and it all counts. And don't let anyone else tell you different.
I think that's a great way to end this thing, since we've rambled on you've rambled on for far too long today, sir.
That's what I do.
So what do we want? We're giving people a little like homework assignment after every episode now.
Right.
What do you want people to do this week to get better at writing a first draft or focus on it?
Well, now I should have thought of that before we started this whole thing. But I would say, just from that last bit, ask yourself why you want to write, and answer it. Answer it honestly, and answer it confidently, and understand that there's no wrong answer. And once you know that, you can start planning what to do next. So why do you want to be a writer?
That knowledge is really important, and no one else has to know. It's not like you have to figure this out and then put it on a t-shirt and see if people hate it. You just have to figure it out for yourself, so that you're moving toward the goals that matter to you and accomplishing things that are important. Yeah, that's a good thing. I would like people to start writing a first draft. Write one page of something that you haven't planned out at all. something that you haven't outlined, nothing. Come up with the slightest hook, whatever that hook is, and start writing something. And then if you need a hook, do a little research online about the way that the ways that people talk about coming up with ideas. I really like the connecting to unrelated things. That's been very valuable for me in coming up with story ideas. The how did this happen or why did this happen kind of situations, or just come up with a character that you think is interesting, or somebody that walks by on the street. If you're really lost, take the next person that you see and figure out how they got there and just write one page of it. But write a page of it with no outline, no nothing, and then throw it away. And you're practicing writing, and you're practicing finding the muse, and you're practicing being able to let go of words. And if it's great and it bothers you that you threw it away, write it again, and you'll write it again better. If it's that important, it's one page, write it again. But write it and throw it away. That's the assignment for the week from me. And
That's awesome.
And then if it bothers you, Adam's assignment will help you understand why that bothers you. It's been a pleasure as always.
You too, my friend.
I will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Written Well podcast, your source for anything and everything in the world of self-publishing.